If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is your host, Bruce Maguire. Today, it's Flat Earth story time. People have asked me, obviously, whether or not I am a flat earther or advocating flat earth. Obviously not. I just use flat earth debates as a great educational tool for developing logic and reason, as well as analyzing human psychology. It's actually one of the best topics to do all of these things at once. So it's very, very efficient. But I will get into my history with flat earth, with physics, with Einstein's relativity, and all of these things that people have asked me about on why I even discuss these topics or my background with these topics. As always, if you find the MINDSHOCK podcast interesting and informative, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through or you won't get them. And if you're still not getting them, just comment a whole bunch on all the videos because apparently that's how the YouTube algorithm works. You can also be a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. And like and share the podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic logical analysis, co-podcast, or requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast, depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. So, I used to be in academia once upon a time, or quackademia, whatever you want to call it. And, obviously the dogmatic scientism was too much for me. So, the cult-like mentality of so-called educational institutions, which of course are nothing of the sort. I mean, I always thought it was interesting. Mark Twain just always was on point. I mean, the guy, many know him as an author, as a fictional author, but the guy was actually one of the greatest philosophers of all time, in my opinion. I mean, such great quotes as never let your schooling get in the way of your education. And obviously that is a very, very astute observation on how indoctrination facilities basically edumacate the genius out of children. Various studies, of course, support these findings that children enter kindergarten or first or second grade with a lot of genius potential. I don't remember the exact percentages, somewhere around 80% are capable of being geniuses. And then by the time they're out of high school, that drops to under 5% because the edumacation got to them. But I mean, obviously other factors as well. I mean, artificial flavoring, sugars, sodas, all just the poisoning from the air, food, water, etc. So that can't be good long term. So anyway, the point is, all of the dogma was a little bit too much for me. I will never tout any kind of degrees as evidence of anything I am saying being valid, because to me, that's the fastest way to seat an argument is to bring up, oh, well, what degrees do you have? Oh, what are they in? Oh, you have a PhD, but what's it in? As if there aren't several different PhDs on every single topic disagreeing with each other. So clearly the PhD itself is not any kind of metric of who is wrong, who is right, or what is valid. Obviously, but a lot of goofs, I mean, they just can't grasp that concept. So anytime somebody is just that desperate and insecure, they have to drop, oh, I got a degree in such and such from this indoctrination facility. And they're that insecure, is that their subconscious just waving the white flag then and there. Because their subconscious recognizes that they don't actually have a leg to stand on. Like, their argument has no actual merit, so they have to appeal to authority. They have to pretend that their degree somehow means that their opinion is valid or their argument is valid in some way. Obviously, nobody has the monopoly on validity, truth, or even science. Just because you went to a particular indoctrination facility, that doesn't mean other people aren't capable of executing scientific experiments. Possibly even more valid than the ones done at indoctrination facilities specifically funded for certain purposes. So again, this is something that doesn't really need to be said, but there's just so many goofs running rampant in the chats and the comment sections that just don't understand these very simple concepts. They haven't obviously looked at any of the introduction to logical fallacies videos I put up on various different fallacies, including appeal to authority. So I'm not really going to get deeper into the background because it's irrelevant. But in terms of experience, I was always interested in physics. And I always kind of knew that there were there was weirdness going on, so to speak. I mean, the dogma, just the sheer desperation by corrupt establishments to get everyone to believe what they believe, as opposed to utilizing logic and reason in an objective fashion. Not to mention just the lack of awareness and just basic mental capacity of people to understand whatever's in the government funded textbooks. They're used as Bibles in indoctrination facilities. And what the goofs don't realize, the textbooks are always changing. Just go back 10 years, 20, 30, 40, 50. And there's this collective narcissism. Oh, yeah, they were wrong and inaccurate before. But everything being taught now, everything in the book now somehow has to be reasonably accurate or relatively accurate or even completely accurate. It's a weird collective narcissism that goofs have to pretend that we're living in some kind of magical time where experts or authorities or scientists can't be completely and utterly wrong about many different topics. So that was always kind of in the background. Obviously, the younger I was, I couldn't really elucidate that in those terms. There was just always something fishy about it when teachers couldn't explain, and there was just a desperation just to believe the book. Like, the book can't be wrong. Just believe the textbook or the curriculum. It has to be right. And all these ancient cultures or whatever, they must have been wrong about their cosmologies, about all their belief systems and all of this. It was just, I always found it a little strange. I didn't necessarily believe or disbelieve either side. I just found the sheer desperation and insecurity of teachers and professors in college. I found that interesting because when you truly know something, if you truly know that it is a scientific position and not a faith-based belief or just blind faith in corrupt establishments, you don't have that level of insecurity. Because why would you be that insecure by anybody questioning? That's the very nature of science. Science is skepticism. Blind faith is religion. So just this, the cult of authority worship, of course, is very, very strong at indoctrination facilities, particularly those of the Ivy League or upper strata, as many view them as. So I was always interested in reading the actual history of everything, because when you go through physics, I mean, relativity itself, it just always seemed funny on the surface, because I constantly reference a house of cards as an analogy for Einstein's relativity, special and general, where you're just building these house of cards and nobody wants to question the bottom layers, and they get all insecure and triggered when anybody wants to even look at those bottom layers to see if the theory holds up. And everybody just has to hallucinate or just do all of this reverse engineering or post hoc fallacies involved in trying to make the pieces fit in order to make relativity true, by inventing dark matter, by invoking all of these assumptions and hallucinations and pretending they're true just to justify the faith in this theory, which of course Tesla tore to shreds right from the outset. So it's very, very important to study the history of the science. It's not just about science, it's about the history of the science. How did it come to be? And a lot of people don't actually know this. I'm not going to go too deep into this. But when they were doing the new curriculum for both public education and for college curriculum, I don't remember the name of the organization, but the organization in charge of putting out the textbooks, they actually, Einstein was the consultant as to whether or not they should displace Maxwell and some of these other physicists that came before in favor of relativity. Now, I don't know how much of a gullible goof, how much of a coincidence theorist one has to be, completely bereft of logic and reason, in order to not understand what a conflict of interest is. You're gonna tell Einstein to come in and, you know what, Einstein, should we put you as true in the books, or these other guys that are your competition that you claim to have usurped their theories with your theories? I mean, this isn't rocket science. Very simple conflict of interest, yet a lot of goofs just don't understand the basic concepts. So that was kind of my starting point when dissecting relativity years after first learning it, and then just realizing it doesn't hold up. A lot of different scientists and mathematicians and physicists of all kind have spoken out against it. So that's kind of, I was already familiar with all of that in the early 2000s, and that's when I kind of stumbled upon a few of those old the inheritors of the BBS group. So BBS, bulletin board system, that was popular on the internet. Well, the internet itself wasn't popular, but of the people that were on the internet, many were familiar with the BBS systems in the late 80s, early 90s. And then they kind of got a little bit more in the realm of what are forums, which have since mostly, they don't really seem to be that popular anymore. Everybody's kind of on Reddit or other social media, not actually forum-based websites. But there were a bunch of different science forums, and I was actually studying the ancients and, again, why they believed in a geocentric system. So flat Earth itself wasn't really a thing in the early 2000s. I mean, people threw it around as a joke maybe here and there, but it wasn't really viewed as a viable theory. However, there were some pretty serious physicists discussing geocentrism, not necessarily in that it was true, but if it were true, how would it work, and how do we know the difference between geocentrism and heliocentrism? Because, of course, it is very difficult based on frame of reference without actually not just being in space outside of the Earth, but you would have to be so far in space as to observe both the Earth and the sun from an outside viewpoint, which, of course, nobody can actually do. Unless somebody wants to claim they can. I'm not familiar with anybody making that claim. So there was discussion, and I actually found, I don't know where it is now, it's probably no longer online, but there was actually a forum, I think it was a sub-forum of a physics forum, where there were actual geocentrists. So there were over 200 currently employed physics professors. I don't know if it was just the US or the US, Canada, UK, but, you know, it was Western countries. Maybe Australia was included. I'm not sure. I think it was mostly the US. There were over 200 professors that were actually geocentrists. So they believed that the sun rotated around the Earth. Now, they didn't go into flat Earth or anything. So I guess everybody was still going by the globe theory, but they believed that just based on their own independent research since graduating from an indoctrination facility and even teaching at one for many, many years, the ones that had the mental capacity, the mental wherewithal to actually question what they were taught and how it actually does work, how it was actually figured out if it was. There were over 200 of them. Now, of course, they didn't go public. I think one or two of them was public. And then, of course, years later, there was the documentary The Principle, which is about the Copernican principle and just assuming the Earth goes around the sun without actually having evidence for it, and everything based off that assumption. But way before that, it's actually kind of curious, the guy who did the documentary, I'm actually not 100% sure if he was involved in that forum. He might not have been. But yeah, it was just curious to see all of these older, in their 40s, 50s, 60s professors who were actually geocentrists, or at least claiming to be. I mean, I don't know, you could say they were all lying, but they were giving arguments and, you know, in early 2000s web-based formats, I mean, flash diagrams, etc. And some of them were into the equations as well, but I don't really like to get into the equations. I mean, counting unicorns, even if you count perfectly, that doesn't mean the unicorns are real. So I prefer to stick to actual concepts, and then you can build the math on them. You can build the math on the arguments to see if the math could support the argument. But if the argument isn't valid, why are you going to waste your time with math for? So, yeah, that was kind of my base. So then when I first heard of the flat Earth theory, I still laughed at it, obviously, the YouTube videos. I genuinely thought it was a joke. But I was already also familiar with the NASA fakery and the moon landing debate, so to speak, where I had already seen so much information and evidence that at least the footage appeared to be faked, regardless of whether they actually went or not. That's a separate argument. You can check out the moon landing podcast on MINDSHOCK. I go over all those arguments. And then my dog ate my homework excuse when somebody asked for the telemetry data. They lost, what was it, almost 20,000 reels? So like 11 or 18,000 reels of telemetry data, the most important accomplishment in the history of mankind. I mean, there's so many problems with the moon landing. So I would say I'm in an interesting position because most people, they are heliocentrists to begin with whenever approaching any kind of controversial topic like the moon landing or the flat Earth conspiracy or whatever the case may be. I'm already deeply familiar with the geocentrism versus heliocentrism arguments going back several decades already. So I'm in a pretty unique position, and I'm familiar with the fraud of relativity. Now, some people would say, oh, well, why don't you just believe in the flat earth then? Well, because the burden of proof is on positive claims. In order to prove the earth is flat, you actually have to prove it. You can't just debunking gravity, debunking heliocentrism, debunking Einstein's relativity. That doesn't prove the earth is flat in any way. That just debunks a lot of the mainstream beliefs. So, and then, yeah, gravity versus electromagnetism. I had also studied the history of Tesla versus Einstein. So anybody who's well-versed in physics history knows about the fraud that took place. And then, of course, the eclipse data that Einstein got his Nobel based on complete fraud. If you haven't checked out the Einstein Relativity Debunked podcast, Run Z Cow does a really good job of absolutely decimating Einstein and his theory in simple, easy to understand terms. But aside from that, I do have all of the historical references and quotes of Eddington admitting the fraud and admitting it was just assumed and reverse engineered to match relativity and throwing out all the data that didn't match, et cetera, et cetera. So you can check out that podcast for all that information. But anybody who's well-versed, again, in the history of Tesla versus Einstein, electromagnetism versus mass attracting mass gravity, I had also, as part of that history and the research, I'll be doing a dedicated podcast on the Cavendish experiment. But the Cavendish experiment did not factor in all of the variables, for example, the electromagnetic forces. So if you don't account for all the variables and have controls, you're not doing an experiment. It's not a scientific experiment. So I was well familiar with the misinterpretation and the invalid Cavendish experiment. So all of the arguments people try to use to prove a heliocentric globe with gravity and relativity, etc., those are all, if you've done your homework, you already realize those are null and void from the beginning. Again, that does not mean the world is flat in any way, that I'm not a flat earther in any way. So what's weird is people on both sides of the fence, I guess, they don't really understand my position very well, which is why I'm doing this podcast episode to clarify that and my history and background with all of these intertwining topics. So all of the points that flat earthers happen to argue, those are not exclusive to flat earth. You can live on a stationary globe where the sun moves around the globe without the earth being flat, and all of these other theories and not relativity and mass attracting mass being true. Now, I'm not claiming that is the case, but that could be the case, because how would I know? I'm also not a gullible goof going to claim something I can't know and hallucinate to have proof I don't have. So how could I advocate for a particular model if I don't have the proof adhering to the scientific method? Now, there's obviously a lot of funny business going on with Antarctica and all this, which could be for many different reasons, not including a flat earth. So, again, let's not fall for false dichotomies. There's many, many different theories out there, many, many different conspiracies. They don't necessarily prove a flat earth. Also, I believe in my neutral objective position, I probably am one of the best people to logically analyze these debates because I'm actually not on either side. I am what some people claim to be fence sitters, but they're actually not really. They are biased to sides. Personally, again, just because of all the history that I've studied, I'm not going to accept on faith a lot of these heliocentric globe arguments because the house of cards that they're built on, I've already dismantled that house of cards. It's already been done. Not me personally, but all of these brilliant physicists and mathematicians have not only done the work, they've showed the work. They didn't expect anybody to take it on blind faith, like all of the people, all of the scientism priests, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye the Science Guy, all these corrupt authorities. They just expect everyone to take it on faith. Whereas true scientists, physicists, and mathematicians that have done the work, they show the work, they explain the work. So you could see for yourself whether or not something is valid or invalid. So that's really all I wanted to go over and give the background on why I tackle these topics and why I'm familiar with a lot of the arguments without being a flat earther, because none of these arguments are exclusive to flat earthers. There's some triggered goofs were saying, oh, you're definitely a flat earther because you argue like flat earthers. Well, again, not only is that a hasty generalization logical fallacy, no true Scotsman logical fallacy, black and white logical fallacy. I mean, so many fallacies involved in that. The truth is whatever it is. So, I mean, people in different groups, I mean, you could have fans of one sports team and another sports team argue the same way. That doesn't mean anything. You could have somebody who's not a fan of either of the two teams being discussed also use the arguments that fans on one of those team sides is using. That's why you examine the arguments based on their own merit. That's why logic and reason are so important in a world where they are quickly going extinct. I might do a follow-up if anybody has any other questions on some of these topics and the backgrounds. I will be doing further podcasts on Tesla versus Einstein and various experiments like the Cavendish and why they are not valid with point-by-point explanations on why, as well as many other experiments. If you haven't checked out the recent Bryant Myers versus Flat Earthers debate, that's actually an excellent debate on the use of logic, logical fallacies, and the scientism cult and the religious reverence it has for debunked relativity and a lot of this other nonsense, presupposing a heliocentric globe instead of being objective, logical, and neutral, truly scientific, which is what we advocate here on MindShock. Hope you guys enjoyed another edition of the MindShock podcast. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Make sure you subscribe. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce Maguire signing off. Catch you guys next time.